Excited to have Monte kind of teeing things off, and he promised me this morning he's gonna stir the pot here a little bit, share the perspective here, especially from the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. In my journey in this, I've been hanging out at all kinds of different ag conferences and stuff, and very tied in on the regenerative ag side. But it's been great to become a member of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association and just be able to see that side of the conversation. I think it's been really eye-opening for me, and Monte, you're really leading the charge. It's been fun. I'm excited for your talk here, but I'll let you introduce yourself and take away. But maybe let's welcome Monte here to the stage.
I hope you're still happy to be a member after I'm done talking today. So which, the giant arrow
the big one, yeah.
All right. So, fancy. First of all, Monte Shaw. I'm the executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. That's a long way of saying that I work on behalf of Iowa's ethanol producers, biodiesel producers, and increasingly renewable natural gas producers, maybe someday SAF producers, and who knows. So you're going to hear a lot about your farm, your acre, and stuff at that level by people who know more about that than I do. I want to maybe take some time and do what the young punks in my office call a level set. Is that what we call it now? I used to call it an overview. I don't know. Level set sounds cool. So we'll go with the level set. What's going on out there? Why is it important? Why is it a good thing you're here? I'm half optimist, half realist. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. I also think there's a lot of challenges that we need to make sure we're talking about, and I thought the opening remarks there did a good job of that. So who am I? I grew up on a farm in southwest Iowa, Shenandoah. We sold a little green paint and farmed some acres. My dad got out of that. I moved off after college, and 32 years later, my dad was retired and bored and said, hey, let's borrow $1 million from Farm Credit and buy some used equipment and farm again. Why not? I didn't want to retire. So 3 years ago, we planted our first crop in 32 years on our land, and that's my dad and my son. I was down there. I had the same job now that I had in high school 32 years before. I drive the grain cart. It's a lot bigger now. I can really mess up some damage if I'm not paying attention. But, so 32 years, I get the same job. My dad still thinks I can't drive it. So that's where I came from. So what did I grow up into? When I came of age, this is what we dealt with. Not a fun time, right? Riding the school bus from the farm into school, passing a 1-800 suicide hotline targeted at farmers. I see a few of you out there with gray hair that probably remember that. Not a good time to be in agriculture. So what happened? What changed? We talk about the farm crisis, the 80s. Well, the 90s weren't really that much better. We just had gotten better farm program policies put in place by that time, right? So what happened? We did something that changed. Let's see, does this do a little arrow? No. So if you look at that from 1980 through about 2000, those prices rarely get above 3 and are generally down below $2.50 a bushel, right? You look after that, and they're rarely below $3.50 and are often at 4 or sometimes really higher. What happened? We created demand. We created demand in the form of ethanol. I still talk to farmers, I don't deliver to ethanol plants, never done anything for me. Well, with all due respect, you're full of what we need to start putting on the fields, right? This was a massive change. We sucked up the overproduction that we had, because what do you farmers do? You go out and you compete and you overproduce your market. 250 years of American agriculture, that's what you do. So we did that, and for 20 years, we sucked that up. Think about this. I just Googled this while I was out here. In 1980, we produced 6.5 billion bushels of corn. Last year, we produced over 15 billion bushels. That is where the true value of renewable fuels comes from. And quite frankly, as we talk about the markets that low CI, corn and soybeans, can open up, the real value, I want to plant the seed with you here, pun intended, the real value is going to be in the demand it creates to crush that bean and to grind up that corn. It actually won't be in what you might get at a premium. Now that's good too. We all like premiums, right? Hey, if I do this and this, maybe the ethanol plant or whoever will pay me, soy crusher will pay me a little bit more money. That's good. But the real value will be in the fact that we open up markets that want the products that you guys are going to produce. Because if we don't, we go back to the 80s, and that's not something we want to do. So we've had a pretty good run, right? You saw those prices last 20 years. We haven't really had a sustained economic downturn in agriculture. That's unique in the 250 years of American agriculture, to go 20 years without a long, sustained downturn. It'd be kind of nice to hit the pause button. And I guess I'm preaching to the choir, because if you guys were the pause button types of people, you wouldn't be here. But I still talk to too many of your neighbors and your friends, oh, it's fine, we don't need to do anything, we're doing great. No, we are in a period of structural overproduction again. The only thing that saved our bacon the last 3 years is Mother Nature's drought. Now it's Mother Nature. I saw a little bit of flooded out ground on the way over here. But if we'd hadn't had a drought and a war in Ukraine the last 3 years, you would not want to know what the price of corn would be today. So let's talk about where we get to that. So we're facing some challenges, right? We're facing some challenges to keep that demand up. So again, this doesn't have anything to do with CI per se. I'll get to that at the end, but I want you to understand the bigger picture. We have these little things called electric vehicles. They are coming. You may not like them, but they're coming. And it's not just electric vehicles, it's more efficient engines that burn liquid fuels. Are there any young punks out here? I see a couple of young punks out here. You guys don't drive enough, or at least maybe here in Iowa we still do, but we used to have to get in our car to go see our friends. Now they just get on their phones. So there's fewer miles being driven. Not only is our primary market not growing, it's going down. So we need to be concerned about that, and what are we going to do with corn if we're no longer putting it into ethanol to put it into vehicles at the same rate we have in the past. What else is happening? Brazil, after 40 years of being told it's going to happen, they've kind of started to wake up. And they're in the process of doing to corn what they did to soybeans in the 90s, 2000s, I don't remember. But anyway, they are dramatically increasing their corn production. This is on ground that's already been tilled. It's second crop corn, safrinha corn. They're not burning down the rainforest to do it. They might be doing that for other reasons, but this is coming off of existing acres. It's going up huge. And who was the world's largest corn exporter last year? Was it the United States for the umpteenth decade and year in a row? No, it was not. It was Brazil. Brazil surpassed the United States as the largest exporter of corn last year. They're also, the picture on the right is ethanol plants. They are building ethanol plants down there at a rapid rate, just like we did in the early 2000s. This is going to affect our ability to get a good price for our corn. We need to be aware of it. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads. If you go back and look at U.S. production since 1980, on average, the men and women in this room raised 210 million bushels more corn each year than you did the year before, on average. Obviously, Mother Nature puts a few wiggles in that, as we all know. What's our corn demand if you back out ethanol? So back out ethanol. What is the non-ethanol corn demand done since 1980, 40 years? It's grown at 55 million bushels a year. Do you see why those prices were low until the ethanol industry took off? What did the ethanol industry do? It sucked up that built-in overproduction from the 80s and 90s. It sucked up that new production, the delta between 210 and 55. Someone did some quick math, they can figure that out. That is what we have to suck up every year just to stay even, just to stay even. And if we don't find something to do this, what happens over the next 20 years if these numbers continue? Over the next 20 years, we will go from producing 15 billion bushels of corn to 20 billion bushels of corn. And I'm focusing on corn today because that's the one we talk about the most, but soybeans, biodiesel, all of this, there's correlations here. So if we don't find new markets, we need 20 million less acres of corn, 20 million less acres of corn over the next 20 years than we plant today. All this is assuming, mid-80s in terms of millions of acres planted that we've historically done. That would reduce farm income by $10 billion. Anybody here want to see that future? I don't want to see that future. I don't want to go back to the stagnation in the 90s where I had to, make my farming decisions based on a farm bill program instead of a market. So we have a challenge ahead of us. And as we look out there and survey this market, What do we see? We see low CI markets as the only thing big enough to do this. We first of all have challenged in our existing markets. More and more states, whether you like it or not, are adopting low carbon fuel standards. So we need to have low carbon just to stay in the markets we are. The potential single largest new market for American agriculture ever is sustainable aviation fuel. It could be 35 billion gallons in this country. Right now we use 14 billion gallons of ethanol in our cars and light duty trucks. So just as a reference point, 14, this is 35 billion gallons, and it's 100 billion gallons worldwide. Now, that second bullet point maybe should be big and red and flashing. This industry is not going to take off, pun intended, unless the government supports it. Because the airlines, you're going to hear from some of them, they want it. That's the good news. The customers want this. This is not us trying to push something. Airlines want sustainable aviation fuel. But they want it for about the same price as petroleum aviation fuel. And today that's not possible. Today it's about double. Now, 10 years from now, think of, when I went to work for the ethanol industry in the year 2000, we weren't the world's cheapest source of fuel octane. In 2000, by 2010 we were. Because the industry grew, the technology, it brought in R&D, the technology matured, farmers kept doing what they do, which is being more efficient. So all of a sudden we were. But you're going to have a period of time where if this industry is going to take off, you're going to need some supports to get it going so that maturity can kick in, that market maturity can kick in. So if we don't have a long-term extension of tax credits to push this down the runway, we're probably going to stall and not get off the ground. Lots of different feedstocks here. HEFA, that's your fats and oils. Think of that as the same types of feedstocks that are currently going into biodiesel or renewable diesel today. You have alcohol to jet, ethanol to jet. You've got Fischer-Tropsch power to fuels. HEFA is happening. It's pretty cost effective today as far as these processes go. There's only so, I eat as much bacon as I can, right? But there's only so much animal fats and oils in the world. So if you're going to get to those big numbers, you've got to go down to some of these other things. So what would this mean to Iowa? You could see that over the next 20 years, this is not tomorrow, over the next 20 years, you could see 11 new ethanol plants in Iowa, quite a few all around the Midwest. And remember, where's this coming from? This is coming from the 5 billion bushels of new corn that we're going to grow over the next 20 years. We're not taking a bushel of corn away from any of those other markets. They're still projected to grow at 55 million bushels a year. So just the extra corn, you could see ethanol SAF plants built in the Midwest. There's still a big debate over where they'll be built. We'll see how that goes, but wherever they'll be built, they'll be chewing up things. So the economic impact of this is pretty good. So what's the problem? The problem is today's corn ethanol, as mentioned, that someone said 53, I use 55. I like to round too, so maybe not as much as what was on the other slide. But don't forget, ethanol is low carbon today. We reduce carbon emissions compared to petroleum and gasoline as a substitute for gasoline octane by roughly 50%. So ethanol and biodiesel, these types of fuels are low carbon today, but you've got to get lower to qualify for these programs. Because you don't just take ethanol and put it in an airplane. You have to react it with hydrogen, and that takes more energy and different things like that. So you have to get lower. So how do we cut about 30 points of CI from ethanol? There's really a couple of ways we could potentially do that, and that's just to get in the game. That's not to maximize the value that's out there. And so one is CCS, so I do want to talk about that today because I think it goes hand in glove with climate smart agriculture. But the other one is climate smart agriculture, which is what you're going to hear a lot about today, I assume, after I'm done. So those are the two things we're looking at. You might say, well, how does CCS work? Okay, right now today there's this wonderful solar array that's growing out in our fields right now. I'm going to focus on corn again, soybeans, same difference. So that corn plant is essentially a solar panel. It's using the power of the sun to take CO2 that's already in the atmosphere and to convert it into energy in what is still, in my opinion today, the world's best battery, which is a corn kernel. It's dense, it's full of energy, you can store it forever, and you can access it easily, the starch in there. So when you talk about Tesla and all these other things, they don't have anything on a corn kernel. So right now, during fermentation, the CO2 that was sucked down by that corn plant when it grew is then released during fermentation and goes back up in the atmosphere. That's called biogenic because it's an annual cycle. Sucked down, processed, goes out, sucked down, processed, goes out. No new net carbon in the atmosphere, but you're not reducing carbon either. If we capture that carbon during fermentation, which is easy to do, and we stick it in a pipe and we send it somewhere and we sequester it permanently underground, you now have disrupted that biogenic cycle and you have created a carbon negative situation to the tune of about 30 points, 32 points. We can argue over that later. So that is why carbon capture and sequestration is so important. Right there alone, that technology gets an ethanol plant in the game. That makes their ethanol attractive to a SAF producer. So if you look at this, here's just a sample plant. I won't tell you which one. It's a plant in Iowa and some of the projects they were looking at. But they're roughly a 55. CCS, boom, gets you down to 25. There's other things you can do at the plant. And then outside of that, you would have to look at renewable energy. The rules are tricky on that. They don't let us currently buy that from outside the plant and count it. So like we have all the windmills in Iowa, we don't get to count that. We would have to build our own wind farm to do that or build our own solar farm to do that. We're trying to get those rules changed, but the government in its infinite wisdom. And then the other thing we can do, which I'll talk about, is climate smart agriculture. So that's one thing. So, well, if we have this pipeline going through, why do we need to do anything else? Because every point counts. And if we have the tax credits extended, every point can be monetized. So we have the opportunity, as you heard from the opening panel, to monetize climate smart agricultural practices. Now I'm going to say opportunity. Here's where I go from optimist to realist, because I do think it's exciting that this crowd is the largest ever, I think I heard. It's exciting that you're all here. You should be here. You should be learning about this. But unfortunately, because a lot of this is impacted by government policy, which is not done yet, we also don't want to get out ahead of our skis, right? We don't want to make assumptions or make farming decisions before we know what's going on. Or at least that's how I operate. So you guys can do what you want. So where are we with this whole thing? We talk a lot about the GREET model. We talk a lot about the score. Dr. Michael Wang is the godfather of the GREET model. He's at Argonne National Labs in Chicago. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for 25 years. They have the world's best model. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's the world's best model. It's called GREET. They update it every year. You just heard about some of the updates. It's what is the gold standard around the world. It's what should be used. But of course, we then have this thing called government. And government has this thing called politics. And so we, of course, can't just use the GREET model because there were political constituencies that thought that was too good for farmers. And we have environmentalists with the ear of the administration who said, no, that doesn't work. We have to have a special modified GREET for these programs. So they just recently rolled out a GREET model for 40B. Don't worry too much about that. That program ends at the end of this year because, of course, the government was 3 years late getting the model out. But what 40B did is it's going to be the starting point for the discussion on what the 45Z tax credit looks like. That's the one that goes from 2025 through 2027 that we hope will lead to the monetization of some of these climate smart agriculture practices. But I have to tell you, the 40B rules, which is that starting point, is not encouraging. We don't know what the 45Z model is going to look like. So if anyone out there is telling you this is your carbon score, it might be your carbon score under the GREET model, but that may have nothing to do with what it's worth under the federal tax credit. Under 40B, they said you have to do three things. Not one of three things, not two of three things. You have to do three things. You have to do cover crops. You have to do no-till, and you have to do efficient nitrogen. And if you do all of those three things, we'll give you a -10 on your CI score. Well, let me tell you what's wrong with that. Not everybody I'm not just talking Iowa here, but around the United States, not everybody can do cover crops really well. Maybe no-till is not the best option for your farm. Not everybody has a large animal agriculture nearby where they can do manure. Now, there's other options for efficient nitrogen and whatnot, but that'd be one of the big ones. But here's the other kicker. If you did those three things and you ran it through the GREET model, you know what your negative CI impact should have been? 25 to 30 points off. They gave you 10. So I just want to caution you, we don't know what your GREET score is today for 45Z. We might know what your GREET score is under the GREET model, but there is no model released yet for the GREET 45Z model. Because if you did all these things and thought you're going to participate in 40B, you got a negative 10, not a negative 25, not a negative 30. So keep that in mind. We don't know what the rules are. When the government's involved, all we know is it won't make perfect sense, right? Now that doesn't mean that it can't be very attractive. It doesn't mean it can't be very important. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to monetize it, but we do need to figure out what the rules are. So we are pushing for more flexibility. They didn't recognize any other changes to your operation other than those three things. There's dozens of other things you can do to lower the carbon intensity of your crops. And they made them be bundled. So we're pushing for recognition of way more practices, way more flexibility for farmers, and to actually give farmers the carbon reduction that those practices deserve, not some portion of it because you want to put, essentially what they said is, this is the Treasury Department too, right? This is not even the USDA. That'd be scary enough, right? This is the Treasury Department. So you have the White House appointees at the Treasury Department modifying the gold standard model to meet their political outcomes. And I would say that no matter who's president, that's how DC works. So I would just say we have to be aware of that. Now the other thing is, will SAF take off, right? If there's not a market demanding low carbon biofuels, then there's not going to be a market demanding low carbon corn and low carbon soybeans as an example. So will SAF take off? The current 45Z tax credit is for 3 years. No bank or institutional investor is going to invest in $1 billion SAF plant, sustainable aviation fuel. Sorry if I'm using too many acronyms here. With a 3-year tax credit. Okay, we need to see an 8 or 10-year extension of that to get real money off the ground or off the sidelines to really make this industry grow. And then it's going to take a long time for this industry to build out. So I think we have to be realistic about the growth opportunities in SAF and what it will take. If you don't care about the 45Z tax credit and you don't like all those government tax credits, then kiss SAF goodbye for a long, long time. It'll be a very slow slog to get there. The good news is that 45Z is not just for sustainable aviation fuel. We talk about that a lot because it's a huge new market, literally the largest potential new market in the history of American agriculture. So we should be talking about it a lot. But 45Z will apply to the ethanol and the biodiesel being produced in Iowa today, going into the traditional markets if they hit those metrics. Because in the early days of SAF, we talked about, what will you do? Let's say that you can give a negative 30. Let's say that they actually get the rules right, and you can supply a negative 30 CI corn to an ethanol plant. We turn that, I round up, 3 gallons a bushel. It's probably 2.9 something, 2.7's way. I can't believe you guys had an unoptimistic number in your chart. I'm really disappointed by that. But so I round. So let's say that you do a negative 30. That's 60 cents per gallon. That's $1.80 per bushel. As they rightly said, we have no idea how much of that $1.80 will flow to the farmer. What I do know is in the history of agriculture, we've never added $1.80 of value to a bushel of corn and the farmer got none of it. Now the seed guy gets a little bit, and the fertilizer gets a little bit. If you're not the landowner, he gets a little bit, and the processor sure as hell gets a little bit. But if we create $1.80 of value for corn, you're going to get some of it. How much? I don't know. If we're talking in the short term and we can monetize this in current markets, I think there's a pretty good chance that the farmer has a shot to get a good chunk of that because ethanol and biodiesel are already cost effective in the marketplace. If we're talking about the bigger SAF market, we have to buy down the price of SAF. It's going to be very hard for the ethanol plant to keep any of that credit. They don't get it. The SAF producer gets it. It's going to be very hard for that SAF producer to pay it down to the ethanol plant, who can then pay it down to a farmer in the near term, just being honest. Why? Because that tax credit is going to be needed to buy down the price of the fuel so that the airline will buy it. They want SAF, but they want it within a dime of regular fuel, of petroleum-based fuel. Now, you might think, well, why the hell should I care about SAF then? I'm not going to be able to get a premium or much of a premium for my corn or soybeans that's going into SAF. To hell with it. Well, remember, it's a 35 billion gallon a year market. We're going to be producing 5 billion bushels more corn over the next 20 years and facing pressure from Brazil on our exports and facing pressure on our current number one corn market, which is ethanol into light-duty vehicles from EVs. So you may not get a super high premium from the SAF market in the short term until it matures and those cost curves come down, and then you can leverage more of it. But it might be what's keeping your price here instead of here, even though you're not getting a premium, just like we talked about with the ethanol industry. So I'm probably way over time. Let me see, is there anything else I want to talk about? So there's carbon scores, and then there's the one the government counts for these tax credits. So until the rules come out for 45Z, we don't know what your carbon score is vis-a-vis that program. Now, and that's the one I focus on. If you're in a voluntary thing, that's a whole different thing. They all have their own rules. But for the U.S. government's 45Z tax credit, we have to know what practices do they recognize. Are they bundled, unbundled, that sort of thing? And then what credit do they actually give you? Because they lowballed the hell out of farmers in 40B. And that was very, very disappointing to see. Then we have to know what markets are going to demand this, so we know what the demand is. And I think, I represent ethanol producers and biodiesel producers. So if I'm in an ethanol plant today, and you're going to hear from one later this afternoon, I don't think I could sit here today and tell you what it's worth. I don't think I know yet, right? We have to see how the market works this out and how the market allocates it. What we do know, though, is if we're going to grow agriculture, it's going to be because of low CI markets. And if we add value to commodities through low CI markets, we do know, history would tell us, that farmers are going to benefit from that. First of all, from the demand for your products, but also because the market will allocate that extra value, and some of that will go to a farmer. So I think it's exciting you're here. I think we farm again now, so I got to pay attention to this stuff, right? It's not academic. I want to know the CI on my farm under the real GREET model. Then I'm going to find out what it is under the 45Z model, and then I'm going to sit down with my dad and my brother, and we're going to make some decisions. And we're already looking at what those options are. That's the other thing. It's good to know where you're at, and it's good to start thinking about what your options are. I'm not sure personally we're ready to make big changes and that might affect our cost of operations until we know what the model is and stuff like that. So we might be 2 years away. Some people might want to get ahead of the curve. You guys are in this room. You're probably the ones that we try to be a year or two behind. That's just kind of how my dad's wired, He wants to let the neighbor try it and see how it works, and then he does it. You probably know a few of those. Maybe you are one. That's fine. So that's kind of where I see all this at. So I really do think, though, you got to figure out what future you want. Do you want to try to hit that pause button I had at the beginning? Oh, we don't need to do any of this low CI stuff. We don't need to do any carbon sequestration or climate-smart agriculture. We're fine. We're already producing more corn than we use. And the drought has helped reduce that. At the end of a 3-year drought, I'm going to call it the end because it's wet out there. At the end of a 3-year drought, did corn stalks go up or down? Shout it out. They went up. Is that supposed to happen? At the end of a 3-year drought, did the price of corn go down $2 or up $2? It went down $2. Largest drop in the last 10 years, largest single year drop in the last 10 years. If you don't see the bright red flashing warning signs for the fact that we have moved back into a period of structural overproduction, then I would just kindly suggest to you to look at the data and to realize that unfortunately in life there is no pause button. I mean, heck, we have a president, ex-president, who's a felon now. We have a current president whose son is going to trial just today for a felony gun charge. And Mexico just elected its first female president. I love history. I study history. If you know the machismo history of Central and South America, the fact that they got to a female president before we did is a little embarrassing. So the world does not stand still. There is no pause button. So we have to choose. Do we want to do what it takes to have new markets take off? That's what the plane's supposed to represent, my comms person told me. Or do we want to go back to the days where we have lots of corn standing around in piles? Because that's what we're looking at. And it's your fault. You guys are just too damn productive, right? I mean, you're doing what you've done, which is overproduce the market. So it's our job to open up new markets. That's what we're working on. We're excited about it, but we have to be realistic about it too. That's my message today, that what we're talking about here today is very, very important to make sure that we don't go back to the 90s. But we also have to be realistic about how it's going to roll out in the time frame. And with that, I probably blew through all my question time, but I'm happy to take questions as long as they'll let me, if at all.
You did great. Let's give Monte a big round of applause.